In September 2025, Saudi Arabia quietly suspended construction on the most ambitious building project in human history. Not because they ran out of ambition, because they ran out of math. The internal cost estimate? $8.8 trillion. That's not a typo. That's 25 times their entire annual budget. The flagship project, the line, has been scaled back from 170 kilometers to 2.4, a 98.6% reduction. How do you spend your way out of an $8.8 trillion hole? You don't. But this isn't just another story about an arrogant dictator building pyramids in the sand. This is about what happens when an entire country bets its survival on escaping a trap that has destroyed every petrostate that came before it. The math doesn't work. Saudi Arabia needs oil at $90 to $98 per barrel just to balance its budget. Current prices? Around $61. Every $10 drop equals 2 to 3% of GDP wiped out. Meanwhile, the kingdom has become the world's largest emerging market debt issuer, surpassing China in 2024. Public debt has exploded from $38 billion in 2015 to over $400 billion today. And the PIF, the Sovereign Wealth Fund bankrolling all of this, saw net profit slump by 60% in 2024. And if you're thinking this is just Saudi Arabia's problem, think again. Wall Street is heavily exposed through sovereign bonds and PIF co-investments. When the world's largest oil exporter runs out of runway, everyone holding the paper feels it. The kicker? Global oil demand is projected to peak around 2030, the exact deadline for Vision 2030 to deliver. To understand why Saudi Arabia is taking this desperate gamble, you have to understand what they're running from. And it starts with a chart that should terrify every oil-dependent nation on Earth. June 2014. Oil is trading at $106 a barrel. Saudi Arabia is swimming in cash. Life is good. 7 months later, $44, a 60% collapse. For the first time since the kingdom was founded, the math stopped working. Saudi Arabia was forced to issue external debt for the first time in over a decade, and suddenly, the uncomfortable truth became impossible to ignore. This was a one-trick pony in a world moving toward renewables. McKinsey came in with a warning, December 2015, and I quote, "Without transformation, unemployment will rise rapidly, household income will fall." The consultants had spoken. The Crown Prince listened. April 25, 2016. A 30-year-old deputy crown prince named Mohammed bin Salman walks onto a stage and announces the most ambitious economic transformation in modern history. Vision 2030. The promise? Reduce oil dependency from 43% of GDP to near zero. Build a tourism industry. Create an entertainment sector. Transform Saudi Arabia into a global tech hub. Saudi businessmen had a joke for what happened next. They called the Ministry of Economy the Ministry of McKinsey, which, given that McKinsey would later earn $130 million a year for their services, might have been underselling it. The original price tag for this transformation? $4 trillion. Remember that number. We'll come back to it. But Vision 2030 needed more than PowerPoint slides. It needed control. June 2017. MBS becomes Crown Prince at age 31. October 2017. NEOM is announced at the Future Investment Initiative, a $500 billion mega-project in the desert. November 2017. The Ritz-Carlton purge begins. 381 individuals detained, 2,000 bank accounts frozen. The target was $800 billion in recovered assets. The actual haul? $107 billion. Critics called it political consolidation disguised as anti-corruption. But MBS had what he needed: the money, the power, and a vision. Here's what MBS was actually working with in 2016. Oil revenue, 43% of GDP, 75% of government revenue, 95% of private sector workers, foreign nationals. Saudis didn't work in the private sector. They worked for the government. That was the social contract. And we'll come back to why that matters. But here's the detail nobody talks about. This wasn't Saudi Arabia's first attempt at diversification. It was their 10th. 9 previous 5-year plans since 1970. Every single one failed. So, by late 2017, MBS had the power, the money, and a $500 billion mega project to announce. The plan was simple: build the city of the future, and the future would come. But here's what most people miss. The project was already structurally impossible before the first shovel hit the ground. To build these mega projects, Saudi Arabia needs millions of foreign workers. But Vision 2030's explicit goal is to replace foreign workers with Saudis. See the problem? Despite years of Saudization programs, the number of foreign workers has actually increased, from 10 million to 13 million. Picture a Saudi engineering graduate. He's qualified to work on NEOM. The job pays $4,000 a month. He says no. Why? Because a government desk job pays $10,000 for half the work. Multiply that by millions. It's an Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail, an oil-powered machine building its replacement while consuming itself. And nobody at the top seems to notice the math doesn't work. That's just the beginning of the contradictions. Because when you look at what's actually happening at NEOM, the numbers get much, much worse. Let's talk about the line. January 2021. Saudi Arabia announces a 170-kilometer-long mirrored city in the desert. 9 million residents, 0 cars, 0 emissions. The future of urban living. Fast forward to 2025. The line has been scaled back to 2.4 kilometers. Population target slashed from 1.5 million to 300,000. Housing modules cut from 20 to 3. Internal completion estimates? Not 2030. Try 2045 to 2080. That's not a delay. That's a quiet admission of defeat. Remember that $4 trillion price tag from earlier? Watch what happens to it. 2017 public announcement. $500 billion for all of NEOM. 2021 internal estimate, $1.6 trillion. 2022, $4.5 trillion. March 2025, according to the Wall Street Journal's internal audit, $8.8 trillion. That's a 17-fold increase in 8 years. The first phase alone now costs $370 billion, more than half of what the entire project was supposed to cost. So what have they actually built with all this money? 90 million cubic meters of earth moved, the world's largest piling operation. 4,500 piles driven into the ground. Worker camps housing up to 140,000 people. But a 2022 site visit found only 2 buildings constructed. Most of the area remained bare desert. August 2025. The PIF wrote down $8 billion from the megaprojects. September 16, 2025. Work suspended until further notice. End of 2025. Construction workforce reduced by 35%. Professor Mike Cook at Imperial College London put it bluntly, quote, "I think it's such a crackpot idea, as surely everyone agrees who is involved in city planning. For the line to be completed by 2030, it would need construction at 15,000 times the rate of normal UK construction. Let that sink in. 15,000 times normal. And here's the thing about linear cities that the glossy renders don't show you. Academic research demonstrates they're fundamentally inefficient. In a linear city, only 1.2% of the population is within walking distance of each other. In a circular city, 24%. The shape itself is a design flaw. They built a city that defies the basic physics of how cities work. It's not just the line. Sindala, the luxury island, opening party in October 2024, 3 years late and 3 times over budget. As of March 2025, still closed to the public. Then there's Trojena, the ski resort. Yes, a ski resort. In the desert, in a country where summer temperatures hit 50 degrees Celsius. What could possibly go wrong? Original completion, 2026. Current estimate, 2032 to 2033. Cost overruns exceeding $10 billion. And just 3 days ago, on January 24, 2026, Saudi Arabia announced the Asian Winter Games 2029 have been postponed indefinitely. A source familiar with the site told reporters there is absolutely no way they can be ready in time. Now, I need to slow down here, because behind all these numbers are real people. Abdul Wali Skandar Khan was 25 years old, a Pakistani engineer. He came to NEOM for the same reason 13 million other foreign workers came to Saudi Arabia, to build a future, just not his own. December 2023, a guardrail collapsed. Abdul Wali died on site. His story is one of thousands. Human Rights Watch and the Wall Street Journal have documented the conditions. 16-hour shifts, 14 days straight, 3 to 4 hour unpaid bus commutes to the remote site, 4 hours of sleep, temperatures reaching 50 degrees Celsius. Workers describe themselves as, quote, trapped slaves and beggars. Promised 1,200 rials a month, paid 800. Illegal recruitment fees exceeding $1,000. An ITV documentary from October 2024 claimed over 21,000 workers have died across Vision 2030 projects since 2017. The Saudi government calls this misinformation. You can decide what to believe. The indigenous Hawatat tribe was forcibly displaced to clear land. An exiled Saudi intelligence officer told the BBC he was ordered to evict them with authorization for lethal force. 3 men who protested NEOM were sentenced to death. This is what the city of the future is being built on. March 2025. The Wall Street Journal obtained internal audit findings, evidence of deliberate manipulation of finances by management. McKinsey helped rely on unrealistically rosy assumptions to justify cost overruns. Revenue estimates were increased to cover cost overruns. Circular logic. A project manager who challenged unrealistic estimates was removed. McKinsey earned $130 million annually for this advice. Nice work if you can get it. Now, in fairness, not everything has failed. Unemployment hit 7%, 6 years ahead of schedule. Women's workforce participation jumped from 21 to 36%. Tourism hit 116 million visitors, exceeding the 2030 target 7 years early. But non-oil GDP? Still at 56% against a 70% target. No Saudi city has cracked global livability rankings. Environmental performance actually declined 13 spots. The pattern is clear. The soft reforms are working. The mega projects are dying. Hey, quick question for the comments. If you were a young Saudi citizen today, would you stay and bet on Vision 2030 delivering a future, or would you emigrate before the window closes? Let me know below. So the flagship project is scaled back 98%. Costs have ballooned 17-fold. Work is suspended. But here's where it gets really interesting. Because while Wall Street hesitates, someone else is writing checks. In 2023, China became Saudi Arabia's #1 source of foreign direct investment. $16.8 billion. That's a 1,000% increase from the previous year. Over 1,000 Chinese companies now operate in Saudi Arabia. Bilateral trade has hit $107 billion annually. The kingdom isn't just failing, it's pivoting. The question is, pivoting toward what? But here's the thing. A pivot to China doesn't solve the fundamental problem, because Saudi Arabia is caught in a trap that has destroyed far wealthier, far smaller countries. Before I explain why diversification almost never works, let me show you the evidence. Every major petrostate has tried what Saudi Arabia is trying. Here's how it went. Venezuela's GDP collapsed 75 to 80% between 2013 and 2021, the worst peacetime collapse in Latin American history. Hyperinflation peaked at over 130,000% in 2018. What happened? In 2002, Hugo Chavez fired 18,000 of 33,000 skilled PDVSA employees, replaced them with political appointees. Oil dependency actually increased from 77 to 96% of exports under his leadership. Production fell from 3.2 million barrels per day to below 500,000. The lesson? Political capture of your oil company destroys productive capacity. Algeria tried for 60 years. Hydrocarbons still make up 90 to 93% of exports and nearly 60% of government revenue. Manufacturing? 5% of GDP. Tourism? $300 million a year compared to Morocco's $13 billion. Youth unemployment sits at 31%. Nearly 40% work in the informal sector. And here's the kicker. There are powerful interests in Algeria called import barons who actively sabotage diversification because their entire business model depends on currency arbitrage that only works when the country remains oil-dependent. The lesson? Entrenched interests don't just resist transformation, they fight it with everything they have. Nigeria. Oil makes up 90% of exports. Poverty rate? 39%. Political fragmentation means no consistent long-term policymaking is possible. The lesson? Without political consensus, diversification is impossible. Now you've seen the pattern. Venezuela, Algeria, Nigeria. Let me explain why it keeps happening. Economists call it the resource curse, and the research is damning. Sachs and Warner studied 95 countries from 1970 to 1990. They found a negative correlation between resource exports and economic growth. Richard Audit found that resource-poor countries grew 2 to 3 times faster than resource-abundant ones. Terry Lynn Carl called it the paradox of plenty. Oil wealth creates an illusion of prosperity while hollowing out government capacity. There are 5 mechanisms that trap petrostates. 1. Dutch disease. Your currency appreciates because of oil exports, which makes everything else you produce uncompetitive internationally. 2. Rentier state dynamics. Elites capture resource rents and build patronage networks instead of productive economies. 3. The enclave nature of oil. It has almost no linkages to the rest of the economy. Oil rigs don't buy from local suppliers. Still with me? Good, because mechanisms 4 and 5 are where it gets personal. 4. Volatility. Your entire GDP is tied to prices you don't control. 5. Institutional decay. When you don't need to tax citizens, you don't need to answer to them either. Now, you might be thinking, what about Dubai? What about Norway? Didn't they escape the trap? Let's start with Dubai. Oil went from over 50% of Dubai's GDP in the 1970s to less than 1% today. Sounds like success, right? But look closer. The UAE has 10 million people. Only 1 million are citizens. Over 90% of Dubai's population are foreign workers who can be expelled during a downturn. In 2008, when the financial crisis hit, Dubai needed a $20 billion bailout from Abu Dhabi. The oil-rich emirate saved the diversified one. And here's the critical point. Dubai built its new economy before oil ran out. They had decades. Saudi Arabia is trying to do in 15 years what took Dubai 40. More importantly, Dubai's model requires a tiny citizen population living off investment returns while foreigners do all the work. That's mathematically impossible for Saudi Arabia with 37 million citizens. Norway is always the counterexample. According to NBIM data, their sovereign wealth fund hit $2.1 trillion at the end of 2025. They invest abroad to avoid Dutch disease. Long-term vision, political consensus. But Norway had functioning democratic institutions before oil was discovered in 1969. You can't retrofit Norwegian institutions onto an absolute monarchy. And the math is brutal. Norway's fund equals $375,000 per citizen. Saudi Arabia's PIF equals roughly $25,000 to $31,000 per citizen. That's a 12 to 15 times gap. As one expert put it, the only way Norway's experience can be replicated is to start with 4.5 million Norwegians. So why can't Saudi Arabia just cut spending and save more? Remember when I mentioned the social contract earlier? This is where it matters. Since the 1970s, the deal has been simple. Free energy, free education, free healthcare, government jobs. In exchange for political acquiescence. Over 10 million Saudis, more than half the citizen population, received direct cash transfers through the Citizens Account program. Over 100 billion rials, about $27 billion, has been distributed since 2017, just in compensation for subsidy cuts. The Baker Institute's assessment? MBS is dangerously reliant on coercion if consent erodes. There's no ballot box mechanism to manage discontent. When the money runs out, what's left? And this brings us to the impossible equation. If they spend fast, fiscal collapse if oil stays low. If they spend slow, they miss the transformation window before oil becomes a stranded asset. If they stop spending, mega projects get abandoned, sunk costs are lost, credibility is destroyed. There is no path that offers a clean exit. So if diversification almost never works for oil states, if the math doesn't add up, if the timeline is impossible, then why is Saudi Arabia doing this? The answer is darker than incompetence. It's desperation, dressed up as ambition. Vision 2030 isn't about building the future. It's about surviving the end of oil. The 2014 crash proved Saudi Arabia had no backup plan. 9 previous diversification attempts, all failures. McKinsey's warning created the urgency. Transform or die wasn't a slogan. It was a prognosis. The real gamble isn't NEOM. It's whether you can transform a rentier state into a productive economy in 15 years. No country has ever successfully done this. At this scale, this fast.
And here's the problem. They've already passed the point of no return. Over $50 billion already spent on NEOM, according to the Financial Times and Wall Street Journal. Sunk cost psychology kicks in. Abandoning projects now means admitting 50 billion was wasted. More importantly, MBS's personal legitimacy is tied to success. One insider told reporters, "It's now just a matter of letting MBS down gently." The finance minister has acknowledged reality, quote, "If we need to adjust, accelerate, defer, or cancel, we will without blinking." The 98% scaling of the line suggests they've already started blinking. If you suspected from the beginning that NEOM was never really about building a city, you're right. The insiders knew too. A former senior manager explained it this way, quote, "As you went below 7% return, it started becoming ever more difficult to sell it as an investment. That is why I think it has died. It's just uninvestable." NEOM was never economically viable. The internal rate of return fell below investment threshold. The projects serve as political theater, a symbol that transformation is happening. But theater doesn't create jobs. It doesn't generate revenue. It doesn't build a sustainable economy. And while the theater plays out, real people pay the price. Migrant workers already facing exploitation will be first to suffer when projects get cut. Saudi youth promised a bright future may inherit an economic crisis instead. Global investors have billions tied up in projects that may never be completed. So why will NEOM fail? Because it was never really a city project. It was a desperate bet that if you announce something big enough, impressive enough, futuristic enough, reality will follow the renderings. But construction doesn't work that way. Economics doesn't work that way. And the math never worked. So what happens now? To Saudi Arabia, to the oil markets, to the millions of workers who built something that may never be finished. So what happens now? Let's be honest about the possibilities. Scenario 1. The graceful pivot. This is the most likely outcome. Probability around 60%. The megaprojects get quietly scaled back further or rebranded. The line becomes a high-end tech campus or data center hub instead of a 170-kilometer city. Focus shifts to what's actually working: tourism, entertainment, women entering the workforce. China partnership deepens. Western investment becomes secondary. Saudi Arabia becomes a normal upper-middle-income country. Not a futuristic utopia, just functional. Scenario 2. The debt spiral. About 25% probability. Oil prices stay below break-even. Deficits compound. Debt to GDP hits 50% by 2030. Eventually, they're forced to cut the remaining subsidies. 10 million Saudis lose their cash transfers. Social unrest risk spikes. IMF involvement becomes necessary. Scenario 3. The oil rebound. 15% probability. Some geopolitical crisis or supply disruption pushes oil back above $100. Revenue windfall funds continued transformation. Some megaproject components actually get completed. The Aramco CEO gets his wish. The world abandons the fantasy of phasing out oil and gas. Now, here's where I have to be intellectually honest. Not everything failed. Tourism exceeded the 2030 target 7 years early, 116 million visitors. Women's workforce participation jumped from 21 to 36%. Unemployment hit 7%, 6 years ahead of schedule. Vision 2030's soft reforms are actually working. Saudi Arabia today is unrecognizable from Saudi Arabia in 2016. Cinemas exist, concerts happen, women drive. The failure isn't the transformation. The failure is the megaprojects, the monuments, the political theater that was supposed to prove transformation is possible. Vision 2030 isn't entirely failing. Some real changes are happening.
But NEOM? The line? The city of the future that would prove transformation is possible? That was always a mirage. And when the dust settles, literally, what remains will be earthworks in the desert, 50 billion in sunk costs, and a lesson that every petrostate learns eventually. You cannot build your way out of a structural trap. Saudi Arabia isn't just betting $2 trillion on NEOM. They're betting that money can buy time, that concrete can replace culture, and that a kingdom built on oil can somehow escape the gravity of its own history. The next decade will tell us whether that's vision or delusion. And if you haven't seen our deep dive into Sweden's hidden crisis and why the Nordic model is cracking, check it out. Links on screen. Now I want to hear from you. Drop your prediction in the comments. Does Saudi Arabia pull off the graceful pivot, or does the debt spiral catch up with them first?